with us. We are truly thankful.
The right wing continues to spread its line that abortion rights are a front for genocide in communities of color.
Well, I'm sure everybody's heard, or a lot of people have heard of Margaret Sanger. And Margaret Sanger, after slavery was ended, she decided that they needed to come up with a plan to get rid of all these African Americans because, you know, what were they going to do with all these people?
They targeted black people, and they made a concerted effort because they wanted to get rid of black people. They targeted them, and they have been, unfortunately, successful.
So they came up with a plan to allow birth control and promote birth control because that would take care of that problem because then they wouldn't be able to multiply.
There's a lot to this, and certainly Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, spoke about the weeds, W-E-D-S, the weeds. She loved what Hitler did, too. If you want to read back and see that on the resources, Margaret Sanger for Planned Parenthood, the founder, never repudiated.
The idea comes from a billboard campaign, pro-life freedom rides, and from a documentary.
Is that the Nazis did not simply target the Jewish population.
And when asked if, by genocide, did they mean on a level equal with Hitler and Nazi Germany?
Absolutely. If you look at the roots of the eugenics movement in America, you will find that it was a racially motivated initiative, just like Hitler in Germany was racially motivated against the Jews.
How do you know that he can't? Like, how do you know he can't get healed or
Plugging into legitimate fears, linking abortion with eugenics and slavery has an impact.
Do you know the history of Margaret Sanger? Do you know how she was a racist, a eugenist who sought to murder African Americans through birth control and abortion?
Much of it can be attributed to the success of the documentary, which has been making the rounds on college campuses and in community screenings. It's received tens of thousands of hits on YouTube.
Since 1973, legal abortion has killed more African Americans than AIDS, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and violent crime combined.
This film is being screened on the college campuses of HBCUs all across the country. 2/3 of everything they talk about is really either omitting historical events or taking historical events out of context. It's really disconcerting because there are a number of people who very much consider themselves politically acute. They identify as pro-choice, but they see that film, they're getting brainwashed.
Plenty of people reject this conspiracy talk, but African Americans also have legitimate reason to be suspicious of the medical community.
We have experienced things that nobody would have imagined would have happened. For instance, the Tuskegee experiment, when they took black men and gave them syphilis in order to try to find cures, and horrible, horrible pain and horrible deaths occurred. Well, that's a painful reminder of what can happen. It's so ridiculous to me, but to some people it could have some resonance, you know, it can resonate.
It's called Maafa, after a Swahili word meaning horror or disaster. The film blames just about everyone from Planned Parenthood, big business, and the United States government. It was produced by Life Dynamics, an organization devoted to making abortion illegal.
It's an interesting piece of propaganda. It's written and produced by a man named Mark Crutcher, who has made a career out of trying to oppose abortion clinics in particular. He has a background in advertising, so he has created in Texas, in Denton, Texas, a small studio that produces TV films, TV shows, small short films, and now this is one of his major projects. Crutcher's idea is that he really wants to go after abortion providers, and the major abortion provider that he recognizes or that he thinks of as using taxpayer money to provide abortions incorrectly is Planned Parenthood League of America. So he is part of this movement to try to get rid of Planned Parenthood.
It's important for those who are watching the film to understand who Mark Crutcher is, who Life Dynamics are, what their agenda is, and how they have a long, long history of using misinformation to try to dissuade women from choosing abortion. 10 years ago, he released a tape alleging that there was illegal activity taking place at abortion clinics. He had the star witness in his tape interview with 2020. He worked with them for months to produce a segment. He sent the tape to every member of Congress, had Congress actually hold a congressional hearing on the allegations in this tape. And what happened at that congressional hearing was that the tape's star witness and the person who was testifying in Congress was actually on Life Dynamics' payroll. And we produced pay stubs showing they had paid him over $20,000, basically to lie on this tape about what he had seen at abortion clinics.
Some of the accusations in the documentary are based on guilt by association.
He also makes a connection between Planned Parenthood and Hitler's Nazi Party as a way to throw fear into his audience. And fear-mongering is one of the dreadful tools of conspiracy thinking.
It's a popular technique. Take a historical fact out of context, oversimplify, and amp it up over and over again.
But they would hire crusaders to do the dirty work. And the primary one they settled upon was a woman named Margaret Sanger.
It's generally easier to undermine the character of the individuals who support that than the idea itself. So in the years of the major abortion battles, and battles over contraception and sex education, people have looked for ways to find fault with Sanger's motivation and her character rather than with her ideas.
And the whole thing would be held together by this kind of bizarre obsession with race and class. The result was that the American Birth Control League became the driving force behind the American eugenics movement. Eugenics would no longer just be a philosophy. Sanger and others like her were going to put it into practice.
And there's been an inroad because of her support in her lifetime for what's now very out of fashion, an ideology that was most popular in her own time and kind of universal in the support that it enjoyed among progressives as well as conservatives, and it was called eugenics.
The eugenicists she's talking about framed their by merit alone approach as a preferable alternative to a society ruled by class.
And again, she wasn't talking as alone. She was talking in a world where every university president, every doctor, every politician supported these ideas that the country needed to embrace science in a positive way and give people the tools and medicine, science and medicine, to better govern their lives. This conversation gets distorted in the 1920s by people who have a different conservative agenda. And my criticism of Sanger only is that she wasn't sufficiently forward-thinking. She didn't look through the politics of what ultimately produces Nazi Germany in the 1930s and see the dangers that lay ahead.
While Maafa 21 is steeped in 200 years of U.S. history, not a single historian is included in the entire 2.5-hour documentary.
It isn't a history. It's a ideological statement that doesn't respect black women enough to ask what their own experience is and has been over time. And fortunately, we've been able to piece together the realities of black women and their struggles to control their own bodies over time. So there's no excuse for overlooking them.
The right-wing's perspective of Margaret Sanger is always talking about eugenics in terms of selection, in terms of getting a stronger race, etc. That's not the Margaret Sanger that I applaud. I applaud the Margaret Sanger that talked about women controlling their fertility, women controlling their children, number of children they could have. She was far ahead of her time. And they know that, but they don't talk about that. She did, in terms of helping women co-founding Planned Parenthood, speaks for itself. Millions and millions of women have been saved and helped because of her life.
Margaret Sanger was a great visionary of women's rights because she understood that for women to become equal, to fully exercise their humanity. They needed more than the vote, more than civil and political liberties. They needed freedom from the myth and mystery that had for so long shrouded sexuality and reproduction, and that women needed more than simply a job or an education, that they needed to be able to balance love and work. She was seen as a great revolutionary. In the years since, it's become more complicated because she's simply become a collateral victim of abortion politics, even though her work was not really on abortion, it was on contraception.
The conspiracy theory this documentary outlines isn't new, at least not to experienced researchers and advocates in the fight for reproductive justice.
This film is based on an idea that Mark Crutcher borrowed from Francis Schaeffer, who was a philosopher and evangelical thinker based in Switzerland. And Mark Crutcher borrowed these ideas as a way to piggyback onto his own agenda, which was to try to disempower the pro-choice movement in the United States.
This is not the first time. It comes up every 20 or 30 years. And people try to bring that up to incite the black community, because some people will believe that. So I think that it's something that a lot of people who are much younger than I am have never heard before. I've heard this 2 or 3 times in my lifetime.
Although new, some worry that it is having its intended effect.
I think people are buying the message. The film is a very, very stealthy snapshot with a couple of grains of truth that basically take a eugenical history that many of us, particularly women of color working in reproductive rights, are very well aware of. Most of us make it a part of our business to push back continually on population control.
It's not having an impact on women who are facing unintended pregnancies and trying to determine what is in their best interest. These are personal, private, medical decisions, not political choices.
What's sad is the number of impressionable young black women who watch the film and suddenly become very confused about their right to control their own bodies, as if they no longer have the right to say what they will and will not do with their own bodies, that somebody else has the right to say that for them. That's sad for us in the 21st century. And so I think it's a very dangerous thing that they've done. Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics, who produced the film, he's been a white anti-abortionist for years, and he's chosen to use this play the race card, so to speak, in the politics of abortion. And what's even more distressing is how much support he's getting for his campaign by going on black blogs and on black Christian TV shows and stuff like that, as if he's the latest savior of black people. Mark Crutcher is not there for black people.
But we're probably not done with this campaign. We will see it happen in other communities, but legislators should really be careful because they engage with Mark Crutcher at their own peril.